In a stunning and historic move, the Supreme Court has delivered a landmark decision that is sending shockwaves through the nation's political and economic landscape. Crowds gathered outside the marble steps, anxiously awaiting the outcome of a case that could redefine the limits of presidential authority for years to come. The court has firmly rejected former President Trump's sweeping tariff proposal, a plan that would have allowed the executive branch to impose broad tariffs on foreign goods without congressional approval. The news broke quickly, with headlines flashing across screens and people reacting with a mix of relief, surprise, and concern. In its detailed ruling, the court asserted that the president does not have the unilateral power to enact such far-reaching economic policies. Instead, the justices emphasized that any significant changes to trade policy must be debated and authorized by Congress, reinforcing the system of checks and balances at the heart of American democracy. This decision fundamentally reshapes the balance of power in Washington, making it clear that Congress holds the primary authority over economic legislation. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill are now faced with a renewed sense of responsibility and influence over the nation's trade and economic future. The case has brought long-standing tensions between executive power and legislative oversight into sharp focus. Heated debates erupted in Congress, with some politicians arguing for stronger presidential control, while others insisted on the importance of legislative checks to prevent overreach. Political analysts and commentators are calling the court's decision a pivotal moment in the ongoing debate over the scope of presidential power. Many believe this ruling will set a precedent for future administrations, shaping how economic and trade policies are crafted and implemented. On Wall Street and in financial centers across the country, experts are already predicting significant shifts in how future trade negotiations and economic planning will unfold. Investors and business leaders are closely watching for signals about what this new balance of power will mean for the global economy. With this decision, the Supreme Court has redrawn a critical line in the separation of powers, reaffirming the foundational principles of American government and setting the stage for a new era in the relationship between the executive and legislative branches. Understanding tariffs is key to grasping the Supreme Court's decision. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods intended to make domestic products more competitive. Trump advocated for tariffs to counteract what he saw as unfair trade practices, especially by China. His proposal included a 100% tariff on imports from major rivals, aiming to boost U.S. manufacturing. The plan was to incentivize domestic production and generate revenue for the U.S. Treasury. Critics warned of higher consumer prices and global trade tensions. This vision for reshaping trade set the stage for a significant legal showdown. The Supreme Court case at the heart of this debate centered on a fundamental question in American government. Who truly holds the power to shape the nation's trade policy? Is it the president, acting swiftly in the name of national interest, or Congress, representing the will of the people through careful deliberation and lawmaking? This case forced the country to confront the delicate balance of power that has defined the U.S. system for centuries. At stake was the authority to make major trade decisions that could impact millions of jobs, the prices of everyday goods, and America's relationships with its trading partners around the world. Trade policy isn't just about economics, it's about national security, diplomacy, and the core values of democracy. The Constitution clearly grants Congress the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, including the authority to set tariffs and shape trade agreements. This design was intentional, ensuring that such significant decisions would be made by the representatives of the people, not by a single individual. However, over the years, Congress has delegated some of its powers to the president, allowing for quick action in times of crisis or when rapid decisions are needed to protect American interests. This flexibility has sometimes blurred the lines between legislative and executive authority. The Trump administration argued that existing laws gave the president broad authority to impose tariffs unilaterally, especially when national security was at stake. This approach was controversial, as it bypassed the usual checks and balances of congressional oversight. Critics, including many lawmakers and industry leaders, insisted that such sweeping actions required explicit approval from Congress. They warned that allowing the president unchecked power over trade could set a dangerous precedent and undermine democratic accountability. Central to the case was the major questions doctrine, a legal principle stating that for issues of vast economic and political significance, Congress must provide clear and direct authorization. The court had to decide whether the president's actions met this high standard. Ultimately, the Supreme Court was asked to define the limits of presidential power in the complex and ever-changing arena of global trade, setting a precedent for future administrations. The decision reinforced the essential role of Congress in shaping major economic policies, emphasizing that the voice of the people, expressed through their elected representatives, must remain central in matters of national importance. In the end, this ruling clarified the separation of powers in trade matters, reminding the nation that the balance between presidential initiative and congressional authority is a cornerstone of American democracy. The Supreme Court heard two contrasting visions of economic power. Trump's team argued for presidential agility in global economic threats. They claimed Congress was too slow to act decisively in trade matters. Opponents emphasized the Constitution's intent to prevent concentrated power. They argued that major economic shifts require congressional consensus. The court's decision favored stability and adherence to constitutional processes. This ruling underscores the importance of legislative debate in economic policy. In a highly anticipated decision, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 against former President Trump's proposed tariff plan, making it clear that the power to impose such sweeping economic measures rests with Congress, not the executive branch. The ruling was a significant moment in the ongoing debate over the limits of presidential authority, especially when it comes to major economic policies that can affect millions of Americans and the global economy. The majority opinion, authored by Chief Justice John Roberts, delved deeply into the Constitution's separation of powers. Roberts emphasized that while the president has important responsibilities, the authority to enact broad economic changes, like imposing tariffs on a national scale, must be clearly granted by Congress. This, he argued, preserves the careful balance envisioned by the nation's founders. Central to the court's reasoning was the major questions doctrine, a legal principle that requires Congress to speak clearly if it wishes to assign decisions of vast economic and political significance to the executive branch. The justices found that no such clear authorization existed in this case, and therefore the president could not act alone. This decision sends a strong message. The president cannot unilaterally enact transformative economic programs without explicit approval from lawmakers. It sets a precedent that future presidents must respect the boundaries of their office, especially when it comes to actions that could reshape the nation's economy. By reinforcing the separation of powers, the court's ruling places the responsibility for major economic decisions squarely with Congress. Lawmakers, not the president, must debate and decide on policies that have far-reaching consequences for the country. In a strongly worded dissent, 3 justices argued that the president should have broader authority to act swiftly in times of national emergency, especially when economic stability is at stake. They warned that limiting executive power could hinder the government's ability to respond to urgent crises. Despite the dissent, the majority's decision stands as a landmark ruling on the scope of executive power. Legal scholars say it will shape how future presidents approach economic policy and emergency actions. Ultimately, this decision will have a lasting impact on how courts interpret presidential authority, ensuring that the balance of power between the branches of government remains a central feature of American democracy. The Supreme Court's decision shifts power back to Congress, reversing decades of expanding presidential authority. Future presidents must now seek congressional approval for major trade initiatives. The ruling brings stability to industries reliant on global supply chains. It removes uncertainty over potential tariff-induced price hikes. Domestic industries seeking protection face new challenges. The debate over trade policy returns to Congress, sparking political debates. The ruling impacts global trade relations, potentially easing tensions. It may alter perceptions of U.S. negotiating power. The world watches as Washington adapts to this new reality. The Supreme Court decision sets a precedent limiting presidential power in trade policy. Future presidents must negotiate with Congress for major economic changes. This reinforces checks on executive overreach. For families, the ruling stabilizes prices of everyday goods. The decision shifts the debate on economic issues to Congress and elections. The ruling reaffirms that transformative laws require legislative consensus. It emphasizes shared powers and checks and balances in governance. The path forward demands more debate and collaboration in Washington.